Good evening, everyone. We're just going to wait a few minutes while we wait for the attendees to kind of roll in. Just going to wait another minute. Wait for people to come in, and then we can kick off this meeting. Alrighty. Seems like a lot of people have started to roll in, so we can kick this off. So welcome to the second community meeting for 217 Somerville Ave, where we are looking to build a pocket park. Joined with us today is our design team, Crowley Cottrell, and Councillor JT Scott. And just to go over what happened in our previous community meeting, the design team presented some very conceptual designs and started to gauge the opinion of what we want the space to be, and kind of hearing from the public. From those comments and the listening sessions, we were able to incorporate this. And now at the second community meeting, we're going to kind of dive deeper into these conceptual ideas and present some schematic designs. Next slide, please. So my name is John Bronicat. I'm with the Public Space and Urban Forestry team, and joined with us is also Councillor Scott. If you have if you would like to speak for a moment.
Oh, I'm happy to just say thanks to everybody for showing up tonight. It's great to see neighbors in here, and really appreciate the city putting together the second meeting. I know there's a lot of great conversation in the first one, and I also want to give a particular shout out and thanks for the in-person listening sessions that you did down on the site over the last few weeks. It was good to get a quick chance to talk with the folks in the Urban Forestry Division about the feedback in that. And of course, we've been getting lots of your emails and comments as well. And I'm eager, just like the rest of the community, to see some of these ideas that have come out. I think, I always say that the folks, nobody knows neighborhood better than the folks who live in it. And I really appreciate the focus that's been put on listening to the folks who live in the neighborhood. And I'm excited to see what kind of ideas are ready to come forward on this. So thank you, everybody, for your time tonight. And thank you, John, and the whole team for putting this meeting together.
Thank you, Councillor Scott. Next slide, please. So how to stay connected. There's many different ways you can stay connected. You can join the Summer Voice page. You can find all of our updates on that website. I post there regularly whenever there's new information, new events, that gets posted onto the website. There's also a stay informed section on that website where you can put your email, and then you'll get reminders from me via email. There's also our Somerville Parks Instagram page, which you can find on Instagram at Somerville Parks. And then questions or comments are always welcome by me. You can reach out to me at jbronincat@somervillema.gov. And then you can always scan this QR code, which will bring you to our Summer Voice webpage. And this QR code is also located on the signage that's around 217 Somerville Ave. Next slide, please. So Zoom how-to. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through this presentation, then we'll open it up to questions and comments, in which you can use the raise hand feature at the bottom. And you'll select that, and then I will be able to unmute you, and then you can ask your question or your comment. Again, please save all the questions and comments for after the presentation. Next slide, please. So rules of engagement. So we are all learning. Please be respectful and assume the best intentions always. All members get to speak without debate, reaction, or response. Step up and step back. So take note of how often you're speaking and consider stepping forward more often, or giving more of your own time. Contribute and be present, stay on time and on point, and then acknowledge that there are other viewpoints that for a number of reasons are not necessarily represented here. Next slide, please. So the agenda. Today, we're going to go over introductions, which we've already done. I'm going to talk about the project timeline. Our designers are going to give a presentation, and then we'll go off to discussion. Next slide, please. So for the project timeline, we're currently in the community process that started in the summer and is going to extend all the way through fall. In late fall and early winter, we're going to move into the design development, where we'll produce the designers will produce a full package of construction drawings. Then we'll put those drawings out to bid in late winter of 2024, with an anticipated start of construction in spring or summer of 2024. And then hopefully the park will be open in summer of 2025. Next slide, please. So this image was brought up during our last presentation. I just wanted to remind everyone to think about this space in the broader context of the area. There's a few other open spaces that are coming online, and 217 Somerville Ave will kind of be this connecting thread through all of these open spaces. And I think this space should always be thought about in the broader context of the other open spaces that we'll see coming online, like the art farm, new potential civic spaces brought on by development, and Union Square. And next slide, please. And then I just wanted to briefly touch on our 3 on-site listening sessions. This was a wonderful way to kind of hear from you all and meet you at the site. I brought some movable furniture out on site and met with about 30 different residents during the course of the 3 days. We showed the 3 different kind of scales of ways to design this space, and I had people kind of vote on where they kind of landed on all of these. And then we just got to have a wonderful conversation about what they want out of the space, the issues, the concerns, and things that you want to see. Some of those were including art, that this space should be a multi-generational space for seniors and for children, that this space should be considered or looked at as a backyard for the surrounding residents who don't really have a backyard because of how dense the housing is. Talking about lighting, seating and places to relax, and trees and different shade structures. This listening session was also wonderful because I feel like a lot of the community got to meet their neighbors for the first time, and these interactions just show the potential for this space. And once it's actually designed and constructed, like all the benefits that it will bring to this space. And I believe with that, I will pass it off to the designers, Leah, Naomi, and Rachel.
Hi, everybody. I'm Naomi Cottrell, principal at Crowley Cottrell Landscape Architecture. I'm joined here tonight by Leah Broder, who is the project manager for the project, and Rachel Tilano, who is the project designer. We've been working for the last decade on municipal projects throughout the Commonwealth, and excited to be here for our 3rd park in Somerville. Go ahead, next slide. We showed the slide last time. I just wanted to let you know that this is where we're at in the 3 community meeting process. We did have a community meeting back on October 18th. Hopefully many of you attended, and this is a meeting that builds on what we learned last time. And then as John discussed, he did his on-site listening sessions and both of those have informed the meeting tonight. Last time we did talk about the different ways that we could start to think about the site. What kind of a park do we want? And tonight, really, we want to show you two schemes that we think answer a lot of the questions, but also then asks more. So what we want to ask for you all is, within what we're providing, what will we be doing in this park? So we will then come back to you November 30th with a final scheme that will show you what the park will look and feel like and have the defined spaces and materials. Go ahead. So just to reiterate, our project goals are to expand the open space in this neighborhood, to address the open space needs of the surrounding community, to certainly increase tree canopy, and then also have the site help with stormwater management and providing some green infrastructure. We've talked about the agenda, so we're gonna go through these concept ideas, and then we do want to discuss with you all how we want to use the space. Go ahead. I'll just continue to talk a little bit about the site analysis for those who weren't here last time, but this is a slide that we're just going to quickly review. Right now, predominantly the site is open, paved in both gravel and asphalt. We do have edge conditions with some planting and fencing on the property line. And then we have adjacencies to the newly renovated Somerville Ave corridor, which provides some bioretention and infiltration strips in the paving for stormwater. So this is part of what we understand the site to have as far as constraints and opportunities. Okay. Those of you who attended last time remember this sort of what we were talking about, a sliding scale of the way a park can function and be designed. And we looked at three main questions, and we asked you all to really comment about whether or not this should be a park for people or a park for plants, and understanding that a lot of what we were going to be hearing was maybe somewhere in between. Similarly, an outward focused park that really focuses on the street life and on the activity within this intersection, or something that was more inward focused. And then we asked about whether this should be an active space or a passive space. Go ahead. And you might remember that we showed diagrams as well to show you what that might mean on the site. So a park for people may be quite open and have a lot of paved areas and areas that could be occupied, where a park for plants might be, the inverse of that, where people take a back seat and the plants take a larger role. Go ahead. The outward focus again, whether this park is focused on the street or something that is more of an oasis and tucked in, and something that you sort of discover. Go ahead. Oh, so we did take not only what we heard last time during this call or this Zoom meeting, and the listening sessions that John had on site, and we charted where people had put their preferences. So we did hear a mix of opinions on all three of these sort of sliding scales of opportunity. And so I want to go to the next slide, because we start to analyze this as far as math and looking at where our averages fall. So really what we found is that most people want either a balanced site that balances people and plants, or maybe even skewing a little bit more towards giving more space and opportunity for people. Inward focus, outward focus pretty much lands in the middle, to have a little bit of both, have areas that are very specifically addressing the sidewalk and street life, as well as having places that are more inward focused. And then the most clear of the opinions that we heard is that this park should be passive. Again, I think that goes back to what John was saying about this being someone's neighborhood backyard, a neighborhood park that's not about promoting a lot of activity that would maybe draw lots of people from all over the city. Continue. Leah, I'm going to pass this part off to you. Okay, thanks.
So there's a few slides here where we kind of go through what we really heard as top concerns and top priorities and start to explain our design approach to solving some of those concerns. And then we'll get into the design and what it really looks like to do that. That's the fun part. So safety was a big concern, both in terms of visibility into and out of the site, and also the speeds of traffic on the adjacent streets. So in terms of design solutions, we want to maintain clear sight lines into and out of the park. So that means no plants that, no planting that would obscure eye level for anyone from seated to standing, all around the perimeter of the park on Rossmore and Somerville, and create a buffer between the streets and the park. So we really move the center of activity off the street. So there isn't so there's not the potential for kids, let's say, to run into the street from the park. Concern about darkness and evening hours. So we know we want to integrate lighting. We want that lighting to be dark sky safe, so it doesn't shine light into the sky, nor will it shine light into the neighbors' windows. Trash was a very big concern on site, and we heard that loud and clear. So we will be locating a number of big belly trash and recycling receptacles to start to address that concern and give people a place to put their trash. In terms of maintenance, there was comments last time specifically about plant maintenance and concerns about that. And so when we design our planting, we look to provide really low maintenance plants and easy to weed. We also want to create a raised edge between the sidewalk and the park as a way to start to prevent some of the trash from blowing in. Noise was a concern. So in terms of design solution, limiting the size of gathering areas can help with that. Designing spaces primarily for passive uses, and providing a planted buffer, especially adjacent to the adjacent homes. Accessibility was a really big topic, and that's one that we heard both about making a park that is inclusive of people of all ages and also all abilities. And that's super important to us, and was really, we were inspired and kind of guided by this quote. One of the residents who submitted an email to John about envisioning the Pocket Park as a social green space that's inclusive and accessible, a space to act as a vibrant hub for community interaction, fostering connections across age groups and social backgrounds. So to do this, all of our furniture and site elements will be fully accessible and not only accessible, but inviting, I would say, and engaging to users of all types. Priorities. So this access and inclusivity were really came out loud and clear. Intergenerational, the idea of socializing and neighbors, shade, relaxation, and that the kind of domestic space that both John and Naomi spoke about. So then we get to designing concepts for the park, and we really wanted to explore the idea of the park as a kind of domestic space for this neighborhood of the East Union Square neighborhood. And so we have two different approaches to that, but they both use similar tools that we just described. So they both provide some gathering on the street, so that's the outward focus, but they also provide a strong central focus, pulling activity into the park. The scheme on the left, which we're calling the living room, does that by creating one large space that's really the primary gathering space where the bulk of the activity of the park happens, but it still has a kind of plaza or expanded streetscape at the intersection, and it also has a kind of secondary entrance or foyer on Rossmore. Similar approach to giving some activity or space to the intersection and also to the neighbors on Rossmore, but the meander scheme is really a series of smaller rooms together. And so as we go through the plans, you'll see the difference between the two. In both, we're really wanting to use circulation in a fun and playful way. So this solid line is representing continuous accessible path, and the dotted lines are where steps might be integrated. So this is just a comparison of the two schemes in an illustrative plans, and we'll walk you first through the living room scheme and then through the meander. So the living room scheme, the primary gesture is pulling everyone into this central gathering space, ramping the space up so that from the sidewalk along Somerville Ave, you can either step up or take a gently sloping path up to an elevation that is a couple feet, 2.5 feet higher than Somerville. So we're trying to give a little bit of grade separation and make it kind of an exploratory experience to get up into that space. And I'll describe more of the elements, but the primary, as we kind of move through the following diagrams, but you'll see that paving is represented with this light tan color in both the schemes. The dark gray are site walls. So we heard a lot of enthusiasm for some of the precedent parks that we showed at the last meeting that had a kind of buffer at the edge of the street with a seating wall. The light blue colored pieces are site furnishings, and we'll show you those in a moment. In this scheme, the light yellow is a secondary kind of paving that could be a play surface or rubberized paving. It could be mounded and have shape. And Naomi or Rachel, just feel free to chime in when I forget things. So just quickly going through some diagrams to start to simplify what you're looking at, because plans can be a bit cryptic. So this is looking simply at the paved surfaces and the seat walls and steps, just so that you can understand entry point at Somerville. And this is kind of a pass through from Somerville to Rossmore. These are seat walls. And then you'd move up into the central living room. You also could transition back down to Rossmore here. And then there's a slope down to get to this entrance at Rossmore. So looking at it with furniture and people. So the white figures are people, and there's a big community table. So that could be a curved table, imagine a bench on one side, movable seating with these tables and chairs, movable lounge seating. And then these light blue circles represent a kind of a water feature. That could be either something coming up from the ground, like a misting pole, and we'll show images of that, or it could be more like something in the ground plane, more of a splash pad, or it could be something different. But the idea is that there's a kind of playful element along this edge with some flexible seating and a real banquet kind of table along this edge. A smaller gathering space at the Rossmore and just seating along the corner. And then looking at the trees, you can see how we're really trying to provide shade for the living room. The smaller trees represent some flowering understory. So trying to use seasonal color to bring interest into the space. And then the speckled zones are kind of areas of mixed planting. Again, a simple palette, probably of ground cover and some low shrubs. We've done a couple of views to give you a kind of understanding of the space and a sense of the character of the space. So this is looking as though you were maybe standing on Somerville Ave, looking into the park, understanding that stepped entry and the sloping walkway into the central living room. And this is that kind of pass-through expanded streetscape at the intersection with additional shade, trees. And then just to help with scale, we threw some people on there so you can start to understand what kind of activities could take place. And then looking more from the corner at Somerville with Rossmore. So this is that pass through. Oh, sorry, this is the ramp. This is the ramping up into that central living room. Just giving you a kind of different view of that central space. Again, populated. So this is what I called the foyer, like the antechamber, the entrance to the park on Rossmore Ave with a large accessible picnic table, and some seat walls, reminiscent of an image we showed last time of a park in Cambridge that had a kind of nice seating area on the way into the park. The expanded streetscape, so that corner plaza with seat walls and planting. And then we'll transition and just show you the other scheme, which is the meander scheme. A little fly buzzing in front of my face, sorry. So this scheme, again, I'll unpack this kind of loaded illustrative plan because it's a lot to look at once, but the big idea is a kind of fun, circuitous path that navigates you through the entire site, and it's a series of 3 rooms with a small plaza at the intersection. The paving diagram, so these long arrows represent, I should have said earlier, point down. So the low point is the entrance at Somerville Ave. Again, you could step up or you could take this gently sloping path and arrive at a slightly elevated primary room here, which we're going to call the dining room. And then there's a second slope or steps to get up slightly higher to what will be the living room. And then there's kind of a playroom at the top, and it's connects you back to Rossmore Ave. There's also connection at Rossmore at this point. So playing with the dining room idea, a variety of kinds of seating, large, this kind of neighborhood family style dinner, I can imagine, and then maybe looser seating, tables, round tables and chairs, and then some backed, more loungy furniture. So you could imagine kind of lingering for longer. It's a different, more quiet activity. And then at the top, again, the light blue dots you'll see, and again, representing a kind of playful, potentially water element with bench seating for the folks who want to watch the activity, but maybe not jump right in it. The tree strategy does a similar thing to the previous in that we're trying, so south is at the bottom of the page, kind of in this direction. So we try to plant trees south of the gathering spaces as a way to create shade over the gathering spaces. So we've got kind of 3 primary rows of shade trees to shade each of those rooms. And we use flowering trees at the streets to kind of alert you to the park. This is a view again from Somerville Ave, looking over at the park and understanding the kind of sloping meander as you move from one room to the next. maybe you could do some yoga. You could point at people, stroll your dog or child in a carriage. And then just another view so that a different entrance off of this is, sorry, it's entering off of Somerville Ave in that kind of meander.
This is actually the view off Rossmore, just looking back
Oh,
towards
shoot.
Somerville Ave. Yeah.
Sorry. Okay, but I get it. So it was probably the same on the other scheme, and okay, apologies for that. Getting a little turned around. So looking at the dining room here, you can see it populated with people to get a sense of scale and what might fit. And then just thinking about, I think, really inspired by what happened in the listening sessions on site and how there seemed to be an interest in bringing neighbors together. So thinking about seating that brings people together. The living room might have more kind of comfortable seating that you might linger in. So setting up smaller areas like you see in that top image, and then the switchback is just kind of an understanding of a planted slope between the sloping path. And then the kind of streetscape here, expanded streetscape with a seat wall where folks can watch the world go by. And now I will pass the mic back to Naomi.
This is where I think we thought if we didn't have time to go through these, but we have a couple more minutes. We did just want to show you that we've put in the plan and shown a couple images of what we think, like, say, a lounge might be like, or a bench. But we definitely want to encourage folks to take a look at some of these images and think about what they could imagine, whether it's something that's quite flexible and movable, like the images on the left, or whether we're doing something that's more fixed, bench-like and or lounge-like, that are fixed, and what feels appropriate for the space. Go to the next. I think that we know that we don't want this site to be hugely active. We're not going to put in a basketball court or pickleball or any real active recreation. But we have, the ability to add in some things that are not just sitting. So we would love to hear from folks if any of these activities are of interest, whether it's adult fitness or hammock pulls, or really just open spaces, say, to do yoga or something along like Tai Chi or something along those lines. Continue. Leah spoke a little bit about, and we showed in each of the two schemes where we might have something like water. And the reason why we like water is that we know that in the summer, in neighborhoods that are dense and hot, like this neighborhood, even just a gentle mist can be incredibly cooling and something that's really fun for people of all ages. And so we could do something, again, that's maybe a more artistic vertical element, like the image in the middle. Or we could do something that's a small, very low spray, ground spray, that, again, is great for kids. It's also great for adults to sit and listen to and watch. So we'd love to hear what you think about water elements. And we do really think it would be these two types, something that is accessible as far as activation and use. Go ahead. And lastly, we would like to hear about incorporating art. We have the opportunity to, potentially either cite some playful art elements in the different rooms. They could be things that are tactile and unique. The art could also take the form of, say, something on the seat walls, like on the upper right hand corner, like something actually formed into seat walls, or maybe something like the image all the way to the left that is, say, an artistic fence. Next slide. So this is where we open it up for you all to comment. And again, we would like to understand how you all see the living room or the meander being used. Also preferences between the two spatial organizations, and any other comments or concerns to help us move the designs forward to our next phase. Thank you.
And I just want to remind everyone that you can use the raise hand feature to, and I can unmute you and call on you, or you can use the chat feature, and we can also answer questions that way. I'm not seeing any hands raised. Does anyone have any comments or opinions on these designs? Mike, me should be able to speak now.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, hi, Mike.
Hey, thanks for taking on the project. You guys have put forward some really nice stuff. I just wanted to mention, so I was one of the people who mentioned some concerns about safety, and you had mentioned maintaining sightlines such that it would be I guess the idea would be very clear if children were trying to exit the park onto the street. But maintaining wide sightlines also means that there's no noise barrier there, which is a concern that I would have. So I live, directly adjacent to that lot, and a lot of people work from home. One of our two of our offices in this house directly face that park, and approximately 3 to 4 days out of the week we're work from home. And so not having a noise barrier wouldn't particularly suit our needs. And I think working from home is one of those things that is becoming not necessarily the new norm, but almost ubiquitous. The other thing would be if there's an open line of sight, there are 2 drinking establishments directly across the street from that lot. And one of them has an open patio that exits onto Rossmore. And so those places are operational during the day and on weekends. And it gets pretty rowdy in the place that's on Rossmore Street. So having children kind of, seeing a drinking establishment on a Saturday around lunchtime doesn't really seem terribly appropriate to me. It strikes me as a little bit problematic, especially if people are leaving that place and then getting into their cars. And also just the likelihood of someone getting hit by a car, that is short and I can't see, also worries me. All of the and I spoke to John about this at length, but just to rehash, all of the driveways on Rossmore are blind, and the visibility is very poor. And if it was attracting a lot of children, I think the likelihood of a vehicular accident is probably pretty high.
So I'll just start in and respond to your first point about noise barriers and adjacency, and just remind you that we do have a planted buffer adjacent to the residences on both sides. So on the living room scheme, we're showing trees and shrub and kind of tall shrubs. And then we also imagine there will be a fence, whether that is a opaque, some sort of privacy fence that would probably have more noise abatement features, or a more open fence. One of the things we'd like to hear thoughts on. On the meander scheme, we're showing a hedge. This could be a continuous evergreen hedge, and then additional, planted buffer. I think, the question about adjacencies and concerns about what kind of drinking establishments are nearby, the beauty and the challenge of being in a dense city is that there are people all around doing all kinds of things. And I think a public park is exactly that. And we have, made a design that provides some places that really are about the street, and then others that are really about kind of a more interior space or interior park-like space. There's, we can't change who the neighbors are and what kind of activities they're undertaking, and I don't think we would want to. So we're not, none of these proposals have been directed at small kids. We're primarily looking at designs that would appeal to a broad range of ages. So we heard and we responded, I think, to the concern about not wanting it to be a playground. And so we really haven't shown that. So hopefully that answers some of your concerns.
And just to piggyback off of the vehicular traffic concerns, this is also something that we can work with mobility to do daylighting to make things more visible, and to also add speed humps and whatnot. There's like other measures that we can kind of take to mitigate that issue that aren't directly in the park.
Hey, I just want to also jump in to say thank you and acknowledge my colleague, Councilor Jake Wilson, City Councilor at Large, who was recently reelected. Thank you for joining us tonight, Councilor Wilson, for hearing all these ideas and listening to our neighbors. And I love all the ideas and enthusiasm I'm seeing in the chat as well.
Yes, welcome, Councilor Wilson. I just promoted you to a panelist if you would like to jump and chime in. Thank you, Mike. I will put you back on mute. All right, the next question. Courtney, you have your hand raised. You should be able to unmute yourself now.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, thanks also to the presenters for these really excellent slides and designs. Both of them, everything seems very exciting. I'm happy to share some of my thoughts. So I really am excited about the meander option. I really like how the different rooms give a kind of different vibe for some different spaces, and it seemed like in some ways it might even be able to accommodate more people, but doing more of a variety of things, which I found really exciting. I'll personally put in a plug for the ability to put up a hammock. I would love that as someone who just lives right around the corner. And I also, to speak a little bit about the potential water elements, I wonder if the kind of mister option could be nice versus something like a splash pad. I wonder if a mister would be utilized by people of more sort of ages, or just to kind of give a little bit of feeling of water compared to the splash pad, and also really liked the idea of a water fountain where you can have a place for, like what you all showed in the picture. And then I guess I'll just kind of wrap up. Thanks so much with a question. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit. You spoke a little bit about lighting generally, but I wonder if you could just talk through a little bit how you might see lighting playing in to these, or particularly into the meander, if that's not something that needs to wait until a later step. So thanks very much for hearing my comments.
Wow, Courtney, you get a gold star because you follow directions. I love it. I mean, not that people who don't, we don't love to, but you've answered the questions the way in which we love to get feedback that's really specific. So it's great. So thank you for all of that information. It's really great. Misters, I think that when we say splash pad, what we mean by that is that misters would be coming up from the ground, and so they would still be mist. So the mister option can come from the ground, and again, it's just a light mist, or there are those misters that are vertical elements. A lot of times we like to use the idea, we call it a splash pad, it's coming from the ground, and that those places in the off season don't really look any different than a regular plaza or paving. So we certainly could have the misters. They do cool a space and not get you wet, which is the thing that we like about putting them into multi-generational spaces. So if you are any age and you don't want to run through them, but you want to cool off, being in a little room that has misters is valuable. As far as lighting is concerned, I think that if we were to do either scheme, we would need to evaluate any of the street lights and the Cobra heads that are in the neighborhood, and the ambient light that they are already put onto the site. But knowing that as the trees that we have mature, that we're going to need to provide some lower level lighting that is underneath the trees, so that during the summer, or in other seasons when deciduous trees have their leaves, that we still have some light in here. And I think that we would keep going back to what we heard pretty clearly from the neighborhood, that this is a neighborhood domestic scaled. So in some ways lighting them like little outdoor rooms, not trying to have big lights that blast the whole space, but having lights that would create sort of a room vibe in each of the spaces. But it's something that we will definitely have more information on in the next meeting, when we start to really look at all of the furnishings and materiality of the different space or of the chosen scheme.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you, Courtney. We also have some comments in the chat box. Mike Katz says, I would love to see some boulders that could be climbed on, perhaps in the center of the living room.
I think that's a great option. I mean, we also we think about something sculptural or something that you can climb on in there for sure.
And then another comment from Wei Yi Sun. I just wanted to say thank you all for putting these together. I love both of these designs, and I believe that the park can really bring the neighborhood together. I really look forward to this park. And then I also just want to remind everyone to use the raise hand feature, because I don't see any other hands raised at the time.
There are. Oh, do you see that there are a couple other comments?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
So a few other comments I see is Mike said, what has your experience been with water features in terms of A, how mosquitoes interact with them, B, do they fall into disrepair frequently, and C, how would a fountain compare to a mister in these regards?
Great questions. Love to answer those. So what mosquitoes want is they want to have pools of still standing water. And so a properly designed area that has a splash pad or misters. And when I say properly designed, I mean that that area would not have any low points that would collect and gather water, or properly designed, it could be that it is actually a porous paving that allows the water to go through it. That's the proper way to design an area that's going to have water on it, that's not supposed to have a pool around it like a fountain. And so if that's the case, if there is not standing water, if there's not puddles and pools, there is not a mosquito issue. As far as the difference between that and a fountain typically has a pool of water, but a properly designed fountain, even though it has a pool of water, it should be running. Where a fountain has a problem with mosquitoes is if the fountain does become, if it malfunctions and it is not moving and it's standing water, that's when a fountain becomes a mosquito issue. A splash shed doesn't have that issue because if it's broken, there's no water. If I'm describing that correctly, there's no pool that's a standing pool. And then as far as fall into disrepair frequently, these are just like a fountain. Splash pads are things that have to be maintained. Typically, splash pads actually do better than fountains. And that's because if they are things that are truly just from the ground, it's hard to have them be tampered with. What happens is that they pop up when they're in use. It's almost like an irrigation head. It pops up and it goes back down. They're very easy to change those heads out. And the kind of spray or fountain, splash pad that we would do, we would work with the city to use vendors who they use typically so that they have maintenance contracts with them. That's my splash pad knowledge.
Thank you, Naomi. Yes, so like I completely agree. The repairs of them, we just make sure that we have good products that we like to use and know work well, and make sure that we have maintenance contracts and that DPW is aware of how to maintain these and are acceptable. Understand how to fix them. Yes. So we have another comment from Emma. I just want to say thank you so much for listening to our concerns ahead of this meeting and making these lovely proposals. Given the fact that we have voiced some concerns and there have been some adaptations to take those into account, I have no doubt that the final project will be wonderful. I also agree with Courtney around the mister and water fountain, as these are bigger parks with splash pads less than 10 minutes walk away. I think these also would be more aesthetically pleasing to the eye, but would serve a function during hot summer days. Thank you so much again for all the hard work and presenting tonight, Emma. Thank you, Emma.
Thank you, Emma.
And I see your comment, will the park be open 24/7 or more limited hours? I believe it will be dawn to dusk, but I will have to look into that and we'll get back to you about the timing of our parks.
I will say that right now we're not planning on having, say, any kind of a gate that closes this area off. So it may be signed, and that the law or the ordinance is that the park will be closed or will be open dawn to dusk. But it's not something that I think, and John, you can speak more specifically about, but it's our understanding is that this is not something that is a gated, locked park during off hours.
Yes, that is correct. So if it was to be restricted by a time, it would just be enforced via some signage. And then I see one more hand raised. Courtney should be able to talk now.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, am I Courtney or is?
It does say Courtney.
I see Courtney.
This is actually our partner, Derek.
Hi, Derek.
Hi, Derek.
Hi. I wanted to put in another vote for the meander. I think it's nice that it kind of integrates the pavement with the green space, kind of breaks things up instead of having it look like one large piece of pavement in the middle. I had two questions. I think two questions. The first was, are these drawings to scale with, when we were looking at some of the earlier pictures of the people, I thought they looked small. To me, the space I thought was smaller than that relative to the people. And the other was, I was wondering if it would be possible to integrate a drinking fountain somewhere in the park.
These are to scale. These drawings are to scale.
Oh, so it's
So,
bigger than I thought.
so when you look at say the picnic tables, the long picnic tables, those are long picnic tables. Those are 8 foot long. So it's larger than your normal, say, kitchen table or even than a normal picnic table. But this is a 8 foot picnic table that we really like. And the reason why we like it is because it has a cantilever so that there can be accessible spots on the end so that and the way in which we're ganging them up here is that if someone were to wheel into a space, they don't always have to just be on the short end of the table, which is what a lot of manufacturers make, is just allowing people to go on the short end. This gives people the ability to actually be like right in the middle of the action if we gang them up. So just as far as the scale is concerned, that's an 8 foot table. And the benches in the back are 6 foot benches. And the other chairs and things are typical Adirondack in the middle. So these are all to scale for sure.
Great.
I can flip back if it's helpful to look at this. Some of the plans have people in them. Let's see. How far I have to go. Oops, sorry. That's not. So here you can kind of see people sitting at the tables to get a sense.
That's
I
great.
will say during the on-site listening sessions, you do start to realize how big this space actually is when you're inside of it. I feel like the shape of it kind of makes it feel a lot smaller than it actually is. But when you're standing inside it, it is a decent amount of space.
Cool. Yeah, it can look smaller when it's empty too.
Exactly. Thank you, Derek.
Thanks, Derek. There's another, can I read Anne's comment? So, oh, sorry, Ashley's comment. I'm a resident of an abutting house and like the meander concept a lot in theory, but worry it will close the space in and make it feel smaller than it already is. Living room seems to open the space up much more and allow for more visibility and safety within the site. Leah, do you mind going back to the two plans next to each other? So I'll go ahead and I mean, I think that you're right that the living room scheme is much more of a open, that's the real difference between these two schemes is, do you want to have this space split up into say 3 or 4 distinct spaces, which is what the meander does? You have a space at the street, you have then the living room or the dining room area, then you have say lounge area, and then we have this say bench seating area, cooling station maybe. So you have more areas. The living room, there are these smaller areas, but they are smaller, and it really is focusing in on one big space. So I do think that the living room will feel more visible and more open. I think it will also potentially be louder. And I think that that's just really the difference, and we do want to hear from folks. And so I think that it seems like maybe Ashley, you would prefer the living room, although you said maybe you like the meander. You prefer the living room because you do want it to feel more open. If you're still on this call, I would love for you to chime in to say if I'm interpreting what you're saying correctly.
I'll just pipe in one other thing. Distinction between the two, I think, is that the living room, if there's a real desire for kind of larger gatherings, like a yoga class, for instance, the living room would be the scheme that would allow for that much more easily.
It looks like Ashley has her hand raised, so if Ashley, if you want to add to that, that'd be great.
Sure. Yeah, no, I appreciate the clarification there on sort of what the space allows for once it's either open or closed off or whatever it might be. I was just sort of thinking initially based on, looking literally out my window at how small, from a bird's eye, it does sort of look, and thinking about breaking it into even smaller chunks, what that might do, but can appreciate that, maybe that would keep it a little quieter. But just from a safety perspective, frankly, I can, at night picture myself, cutting through it when I'm coming home or something, coming around that corner on Rossmore. Just worried about, visibility, not just from the edge of the park to the street, but within the park as well.
Sure, I think that part of what we've done in the meander, and this is just a best practice that we use in all of our urban design work, is that in any space that you're in, we give you more than one way out. So even if you're in the most inner of the, say, loungy space in the meander, you have multiple ways that you can get out of the space. So it actually has 4 ways to get in and out. And then, same for the living room, the dining room space. You have 4 ways to get in and out. Now only 2 of those 4 ways are accessible. Oh no, there's 3. There's actually 5 ways to get out, because you can go out to the street. So even though we're talking about them being rooms, there's actually lots of ways to get out of them and into them. And so I think that promotes a feeling of safety. And then I think the big thing that we would do there is just to make sure that it is well lit for being able to get out at night.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, Rossmore especially gets very dark at night. Just walking home from work tonight, I noticed how dark it was, and that was, early in the day. So lighting would be, much appreciated within the space, but not coming up into the, abutting buildings.
Sure.
Similarly, would you mind just touching on as well a question I had about the trees in the space? How high are we looking at? Sort of based on where they are?
Well, we do want to have canopy trees. So trees that will cast shade onto the paved areas. So again, we have, as Leah, when she walked through, in both of these schemes, we have trees on the south side of the paved areas. So in the meander, there are 3 lines. They're all on the south side, so that in summer, those areas get shadow. And then same in the living room, we've got the southernmost, and then the northernmost row of 3 actually casts some shadow onto that little alcove or vestibule kind of area. So we have provided for shade. One of the things that we want to do, and I think if you go to the next slide, we want to make sure that if we're choosing trees, that they are things you can see under. We don't want to choose short trees because that doesn't promote the sight lines through the site. So we are looking at trees that, are true canopy trees that like street trees or canopy trees, to be able to both benefit from the shade and to be able to look underneath.
Awesome. Thank you. Appreciate the clarification.
Thank you. All right, we have another raised hand from Philip. You should now be able to unmute yourself, Philip.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to present both of these ideas. Both, in my eyes, very different from what was originally proposed. But nonetheless, I like the living room. But I also like the meander. What I like about the meander is that it pulls the entrances away from the abutting property. So for people hanging out and trash accumulation, whatever it may be, at least somebody coming out of either one of my houses is not spooked by a group of people just hanging out there. I have a lot more personal questions than most, being the direct abutter on both of these properties, on Somerville and Rossmore. And I was wondering if maybe, we could have like a private meeting, because as I see these elevations, what happens to this property line in the back? Is there going to be some sort of a retaining wall built? Or is it just going to be a slide off? I have many questions about the perimeter of the abutting properties. Nobody's addressed the rodent issue. I see a lot of greenery, bushes, and all sorts of landscape here that is just a breathing grounds for all the rodents that live in the neighborhood. Yeah, I was really hoping to get, some personal time with the development team and answer some of the questions that I have that can't be answered at this time.
Philip, I'm more than happy to, if you send me an email or give me a call, I'm happy to talk with you offline about these concerns, and then I can circulate these comments that you have to the design team. So please feel free to give me a call or send me an email, and we can talk offline about that. Leah and Naomi, I don't know if you want to talk about how the slope is working. I don't know if the idea is that it's kind of rising up in the center and that it's kind of flat around the perimeter of the property, or if you're envisioning some type of retaining wall. I don't know if you can talk about that.
Sure. So there would be, I think, a curb edge at a minimum around the abutter properties on the living room scheme, and it might grow to be a taller wall at this edge, which is where the greatest change in grade is, and it's also a narrow point in the planting. But the rest of the planting will be able to kind of tip toward a curb wall. And then on the meander scheme, we're also showing a kind of hard-edged solution, potentially with a fence or a hedge. And again, making the slope accommodation in the planting. I hear embedded in Philip's question is concern, I think, probably about drainage or erosion. And so we always are careful to detail any slopes adjacent to residential or any kind of property, so that we are really containing all of the water on our site. And that's part of the green infrastructure solutions that we talked about. So if we have slopes, we're incorporating the appropriate drainage layers, and we're tying back into the city storm as needed if there's any areas that have kind of larger watersheds. It would not be our intent to drain any water onto the adjacent residential properties.
I see that there isn't some other comments. John, is it okay if I take them in the chat?
So sorry, I was talking on mute.
Oh, you were.
My apologies there. So I do see a comment from Mike in the chat. Could the entrance on Rossmore Street be made more narrow to permit more of a noise barrier towards Rossmore, given that it's residential? I live directly across the street, and there will be still be a direct line of sight / sound to my home. The houses here are all 3 stories tall, and I don't imagine a sound barrier could be erected high / wide enough to mitigate that.
Well, I think that we can certainly study closing down some of the entrances. We still think it's really important to have multiple entrances from lots of different sides. And really, again, that goes to wanting the area to have what, the things that we heard from folks from the very beginning, which is a balance of that inward and outward focus, but also really that safety and security that we were sort of talking about before, with lots of ways to get in and out. But I do hear you. I mean, we have 2 larger openings from gathering spaces in the meander that point towards Rossmore. We also have 2 in the living room scheme, one being a set of stairs and then the one being the other entrance. It's a balance. So I can't say that we would close them off completely, because I think that to do that would make the site a lot less safe. And I think we also, and I understand that it's that there. I understand the concern. Closing it off with something that's really solid, again, just becomes a security issue. And we do actually think that the more openings and the more eyes on the park, the safer it becomes. And so we do like to have larger openings and those sight lines. So it's a balance, and we can certainly look at it. And maybe try to be even more strategic about how big they are.
I think Mike then added perhaps tall trees that might create a tall canopy over the entrances. So that would be some noise buffering. That's a great idea.
Thank you. And then Tori, I see that your hand is raised up. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Leah and Naomi, for the presentation. Thanks, John, for being a leader on this project. So I want to combine the 2. For me personally, I really love the sort of like curvy, sort of natural way that humans flow. I mean, if let's say we weren't forced into being on grids, it's more of we don't walk straight lines and right angles. So I want to combine the curvature and the sinuousness of the living room with the sort of like angularness of the meander. So kind of soften those angles and just have it be more flowy. I appreciate the variety, it seems, of trees and shrubs. Like for again, the living room, having a variety of understory trees that are able to buffer sound of the adjacent properties. I know we have the homeowner or property owner here, and I know rats are concerned. We have rats, but we really need our pollinators and birds right now. And so for me, that's as long as we have food that's contained, that's one of our biggest challenges. So so one thing that I was hoping for this site was, oh, maybe we can do a Miyawaki here. And now I'm thinking we could do like a mini Miyawaki with really densely planted understory as a buffer. And when I say densely planted, I don't know if you've had experience in Miyawaki, but it's like trees and shrubs that you plant 18 inches apart when they're very, very young, and they grow quickly and tall. So that's just a suggestion. So yeah, that's the idea. I am curious, John, about the interpretation of the feedback you got, because one of the, it's like, oh, do we want a park for people or a park for plants? And those don't have to be exclusive of each other. Personally, I'd like to see more green space. I'd rather do yoga on on a green space than in a plaza. So I wonder if we can increase the green space and sort of, and to just the city, the frame or the consultants, I don't know who chose the framing being parks for people or parks for plants. It's like parks that have more hardscape or parks that have more nature in them, because it's both. It's natural for humans to be.
I'm gonna take your
Yeah,
question
yeah, go
completely.
for it. Thank you for
Leah, do
stopping
you
me.
want to go back to I mean, maybe go back to the framework. So when we started the last meeting, we had this discussion and we specifically talked about the Milwaukee Forest, because there was a listening session prior to us being hired. And there was a voice talking on in the audio that we heard, wanting to have that. Now, this is the idea being a park for plants, in that in the Milwaukee Forest, it's very hard to occupy that. And so what we were trying to set up was, do you want to have something like a Milwaukee Forest that doesn't allow for larger gatherings, or do you want to have a place that has larger gatherings for people? And so we were by no means saying it's one or the other. We were saying that we hope that we can have a balance between these things, but we wanted to understand where people's preferences lie. And so, do you want to have more hardscape, more green space? I mean, I think it's the same idea. And we had a great discussion about it. And it was very clear last time that people really wanted to have a combination. And so I think that you'll see that within our plans, we're actually really trying to physically knit the two. Like in the meander, we're trying to knit the two together. And in the living room, we're trying to sort of hug one around the other. So we are trying to land in a spot that's both. But as far as the Milwaukee Forest, the last time we had this conversation, there was pretty clear direction that people were not interested in that being the majority of what took up the site. Now, is it as effective if we do a patch of it within the park? I mean, we could look into that. I think that the concern there is the sight lines and the ability to be able to have that safety and security. So specifically, we did talk about it last time, and we used the Milwaukee Forest at Dennehy Park in Cambridge as the example of what a park that's just built in and around plants might look like. And we took the Dennehy Park size and actually superimposed it on our site so that you could see how big it was. And if we were to replicate that kind of size, it was taking up about 85% of the space on the park. So you could maybe sort of read around it or through it.
Right. No, so my suggestion was actually just kind of having it like the Park for People slide. Actually, you see that edge there?
Yeah.
I just did a Milwaukee. It was 600 square feet.
Okay.
So tiny. Think about 10 feet wide, 60 feet long, using a lot of understory plants. So that was my suggestion, rather than having hedgerow, which can just kind of be monotonous. That might be a solution to create more biodiversity. So that's, I was in no way saying.
I'll just say this too, that
Sure.
the last time when we had the meeting, we had residents and we had the owner, Philip, who owns the two buildings, discuss specifically the concern with too much vegetation near their home. So again, trying to have a balance. So, I mean, I think that we can find spots within, if you want to go back to the two schemes, that are more densely planted. And certainly we have a lot of green space that at this point is not designed yet, but the idea behind the green is that it would be a variety of ground cover shrubs, pollinators, and things of that like.
And just to touch on two other concerns that were brought up during about the Milwaukee Forest was that trash can kind of get caught in this area, and rats can create nests in these areas, and it's very, very hard for DPW to get into these forests and actually mitigate those issues. So that's why we were starting to look at other forms of creating pollinator habitat that isn't a very densely the Milwaukee forest. All right, I'm seeing a few more comments in the chat bar. Ashley said, sorry, just want to make sure I'm in the right spot. Yes, Ashley said, any concerns about the trees blocking sunlight on abutting properties? I'm in the upper unit of the neighboring house, and I have 5 windows overlooking the site, and I would like to keep the natural light coming into my space.
So I think that the living room scheme holds the trees farther away from the houses, the canopy trees. And then in the meander, really, we have 2 trees that are going to cast shadows, but we do also think that because of the spacing that there will also be during the course of the day as the sun moves around, there will be areas that are relating to the open rooms that will still have sun within them, and feeling like that there's a balance between sun and shade here. And so unlike, say, having a row of trees all along the property line, we feel like this is a good balance of openness. And but again, in the meander has 2 trees that are closer than trees in the living room.
Thank you. And then Emma had a comment saying, just want to point out that aside from the entrance facing Mike's home, the other entrance on the meander is also directly across the street from the patio for the sports bar, which gets rowdy on the weekends, presenting safety concerns. I think we can look at ways of, it's the entrance that's more to the south of that. Yes, that like middle one with the communal tables. That sports club is has kind of a patio right across the street. Yes, right about there.
I guess I'd love to hear from folks if they think that what's going to happen is that people are going to, is the concern that if it's directly across, that it becomes a spillover space? Because are people going to be allowed to like take their beers across the street and start sitting at the tables? Is that the concern? Is that just the spill out if it's directly across?
So,
Uh,
I think Mike will know the answer since he lives right there.
yeah, Mike, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Hey, yeah, thank you. And the answer to your question is unfortunately, yeah. During the, I guess, listening sessions, people might have noticed all the small liquor bottles that are lying around in that property, and they are primarily from the patrons of that sports bar. So that's a place where they come to get a couple of drinks in beforehand, and it's also a space where they have historically spilled over after leaving that place. Hopefully the inclusion of a nice green space makes it maybe less inviting to them after. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things is that if other people in the neighborhood are in there, right? I mean, right now, no one goes in there because it's a parking lot or a formal parking lot and gravel, and well, now it has a fence around it. So, but certainly wasn't inviting for, say, your local families or seniors or, other folks. So that is really the hope, is that with a thoughtful renovation, that it becomes a place, that a hub of good activity and not just illicit or nuisance behavior.
I guess the other thing is reporting and having eyes on the street, because if things are happening and getting reported and there's attention brought to it and law enforcement, if that's what needs to happen, then I think over time, I think that'll have an effect. I don't know if,
I could say over the past couple of years, it hasn't had a real influence on that business, unfortunately. So from it is not with infrequent notice that the police have showed up to that place, but they continue to operate as if that's sort of a non-concern. But I recognize that's that's neither here nor there. It's just kind of something that everyone's hopeful for.
Thanks, Mike. And I'm noticing that we have about 6 minutes left in the presentation, so I am going to have one or two more comments. And I know Philip just raised his hand, so you should be able to speak now, Philip.
So regarding that sporting club that's there, I don't even think they have permission to have a patio and outdoor seating and outdoor drinking. So as a community, maybe if we do enough complaining, that will get shut down. I can tell you that a lot of the rat problem comes from there on that patio where they have their trash. Things are not just properly stored and put away. As I'm there during the day or nighttime, I continuously see them running to and from that entire area. So yeah, maybe as a community, we come together and, do something about this sporting club. I would love for them to stay and be established, but you gotta follow the rules. If you don't have a permit to be outside and have that seating outside, then why have them been operating that way, essentially, for years now? It's one thing when one voice has their opinion, but it speaks louder when multiple voices are spoken about a concerning issue. And as far as the living room and the meander, a lot of my issues really are the border of my two properties, and I would love nothing to see hardscape around. I'd like to see a privacy fence and hardscape up against that fence, just to keep any debris, rodents, all that away from the abutting property. That would take care of everything and just kind of pull everything more into the middle. Less bushes and that kind of Milwaukee type of a thing. That's just a breeding ground. I think everybody's kind of on the same page with that. But I plan on reaching out to you and having some more detailed conversations about what's happening with the design.
Yes, please send me an email and we can talk offline about that.
Yes, thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, we have time for one more quick conversation from Tori, and then we'll move into closing remarks.
Yeah, I'll try to be quick. Some of my comments might have been lost with the Milwaukee subject, but I would be just interested in sort of the combination of the two, what a sinuous meander might look like. My other request is that you come to the Urban Forestry Committee and present these concepts. We meet every third Thursday of the month, so our next meeting is this upcoming Thursday from 4:30 to 6:30. We would love to have you. We have a lot of good people on the commission who might have some interesting ideas. And the third comment is, I just want to make sure we don't do any hostile architecture in this area. Even those I don't know, like plates that people that the city has been putting on granite curbs to prevent people perhaps from sleeping there, or preventing people from skateboarding there. I feel like skateboarders are our 18-hour security that we don't think about, because they can use the park in later hours, and that if you've ever been to a skateboarding park, it is a very soothing sound. And so I just wanted to put those three suggestions and one offer in. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tori.
Thank you.
Alrighty. So I think with the time, maybe we can just go to the last slide, and I can just remind everyone to how to stay in contact and what's coming up next. So as a reminder, our next community meeting is November 30th, which is a Thursday at 6:30. I will be posting the registration for that on the Summer Voice webpage in the coming week, and we'll send out an email that you guys can all register for. So that will be our next presentation where we'll kind of refine these two concepts into one more advanced design and gather your input then. And then, as always, you can reach out to me via the Summer Voice webpage, which you can do by scanning the QR code on the posters or by just Googling 217 Somerville Ave. Summer Voice. You can always reach out to me at my email, jbronenkant@somervillema.gov. And I'm always happy to answer your questions or your comments. And we really appreciate everyone coming out to this meeting. And I really appreciate Councillor Scott and the design team for presenting, well, Councillor Scott for attending and the design team for presenting this wonderful presentation.
Thank you, John. Thank you, everybody. Have a great night.
Yes, thanks
Thank
to all
you.
the community for coming and
Appreciate it.
speaking. Good night.
Thank you all.
We have a private meeting now that everybody's gone, and I have you, John, and the architects.